Chapter 3. The police work around the Miranda de Maestro murder. 3.1. A 3 a.m. phone call. James Locker woke up with a twitch as his phone rang in the middle of the night. He watched his nightstand clock, which showed the time 3 a.m. He reached for his phone and somehow managed to press the respond button. It was John Dean on the other line. John Dean said, "Good morning, sunshine. Time for your first assignment as a detective." James Locker said, "What the fuck? Why can't criminals work in the day?" "It would be a lot better for my rhythm. And how come the local police called you before they called me?" John Dean said, "Well, they haven't updated their staff listing, so they called me when they could not reach Michael Fuller." "It's ironic that they called the right person by mistake." James Locker said, "Yeah, I could tell by your reaction at the staff meeting that you were disgruntled, but don't let that shit affect your work." John Dean said, "Just saying, detective. The crime scene is at the De Maestro's mansion at the Esplanade in Mosman. Come as quickly as possible. I will assemble the team." James Locker took a shower and made himself a cup of strong coffee. He felt nauseous from sleep deprivation. Today was going to be a long day as he steered his car towards Mosman. 3.2. At the murder scene. James Locker arrived at the crime scene at exactly 4:30 a.m. He was late, as he should be at the crime scene within an hour after receiving the call. But he had felt very nauseous when taking his shower, so he had decided to stick his fingers down his throat and throw up. After throwing up, he had felt a bit better, but James had still decided to drive slowly to avoid an accident, despite the roads being empty in the middle of the night. The entire team was there, and Adam Smith greeted James. Adam Smith said, "Good morning, James. You're late, and you don't look very well. Did you get stuck with your thing in a glory hole on Oxford Street?" James Locker said, "Still working hard to keep your values rating at a minimum, I hear. To be honest, it's the alcohol withdrawal that's killing me." Adam Smith said, "That's a shame. You should have joined Thomas and I for the gym last night. An excellent way to sweat out some of the bad stuff." James Locker said, "I guess so. You never called me last night. Where is John Dean? He was the one who got me here." Adam Smith said, "John is in the master bedroom where the murder took place. You should meet him there." James Locker entered the mansion. Although he was no ace on the property market, he estimated that a house like this would be sold for at least $5 million and probably a lot more. "Oh, even the rich people kill each other," James muttered before proceeding down the hall. Suddenly, he stopped and stared at the painting. James had never been to this house before, and yet the artwork seemed so familiar, almost like he had seen the lady it depicted before. She was staring into his soul and whispering to him, but he could not understand what she said since she spoke a foreign tongue. Thomas Anderson approached him and spoke. Thomas Anderson said, "What's the matter, boss? You look like you are seeing a ghost." James Locker said, "Almost. That painting looks so familiar. I'm sure I have seen it before." Thomas Anderson said, "Oh, I did not know you were a big fan of art." "Well, you might have, provided it's stolen and a famous piece. Do you remember the lecture Barry Itch gave to us 2 months ago about the new app we would use to identify stolen art quickly?" James Locker said, Vaguely, but I did not pay very much attention. Thomas Anderson said, well, I remember the lecture quite well. They were showing some famous pieces of missing artwork and how to use the app. This could be the right time to put this application into action. The Stolen Art Cell phone app was the latest step by Interpol to quickly identify stolen high-value art. The app used face recognition software used by anti-terrorist agencies for ages and applied this technique on paintings. Thomas took a high-definition picture of the artwork and uploaded it into the Interpol database. A few minutes later, he got a match. It was a match for a piece stolen from an Australian collector a few years earlier. Thomas Anderson said, "Great, I'm sure the stolen property team will be overjoyed, and this could help us as well. Now go and see John. I'm sure he's eager to see you." James walked down the hall and entered the master bedroom where John Dean and 2 members of the forensics department were looking for traces. John turned around, looked at James with a crooked smile and spoke. "Oh, look who is here. Cinderella finally woke up from her beauty sleep." James Locker did not like the arrogant tone of John Dean, who no doubt was still upset about not getting the promotion. He decided to bite back in a similar tone. James Locker said, "I arrived a while ago and I have already discovered that this mansion contains stolen art. Considering how much longer you have been here, why is the killer not apprehended?" John Dean said, "Okay, let's calm down and focus on work, shall we?" James Locker said, "Since you are my subordinate, I would appreciate that you acted that way." John turned red from anger and he struggled for a while to keep his composure before continuing to speak. John said, "We have not captured the killer yet. The killer did not stay here and wait for the police. However, from what we know this far, we can make some assumptions." James Locker said, "Hit me." John Dean said, "Well, firstly, there was no sign of forced entry into the building. So, whoever the killer was, the murdered woman, Miranda de Maestro, had let him in willingly, or he had access to the keys and alarm codes. Secondly, the bedroom is decorated with roses, an ice bucket with a champagne bottle, and live candles. So, she must have been expecting a romantic encounter. Thirdly, the way she died implies a hitman had killed her and not a crime of passion." James Locker said, "Well, that's a great start. Let's gather the team for a briefing. I'm starving, so let's meet up at the coffee shop just down the road." The team gathered and they headed for the cafeteria just down the road. The time was now 5:30 in the morning, and it would still take some time before the sun would rise and spread some warmth this crisp August night. 3.3 Team Briefing at the local coffee shop. The team gathered at the posh but still friendly and welcoming Mossman Cafe. Even though they were alone when they arrived, the group asked for the conference room for their meeting. The entire team was present, and James Locker started the talking. James said, "Okay, so this is what we know. Miranda de Maestro, a Colombian national and the wife of the businessman Antonio de Maestro, is found dead in the Mossman mansion. From the way she was killed, it looks like we're dealing with a professional killer. It appears she was waiting for someone for a romantic encounter. There are no signs of a break-in, so we assume the killer was let in by Miranda or had the keys and access codes to the building. In the mansion, we found stolen art, and the stolen goods department will be called in to assess if there are any other stolen objects in the house. Any suggestions on what would be our first step? Adam Smith said, well, finding her husband, Antonio Di Maestro, should be our first step. Fortunately, due to the stolen art, we have increased authority and can request to have him arrested on sight. James Locker said, very well, that's your task. John Dean said, speaking with the security company would be a priority. After all, it was a security guard who found her after someone set off the alarm. James said, I leave that to you, John. Thomas Anderson said, I will look through her computer and phone to see if there are any clues on why anyone would want her dead. James Locker said, great. Well, to the rest of you, I implore you to knock the doors in the neighborhood to see if anything interesting come up. I will return to the office and coordinate our efforts. Please update me continuously with your findings. Please meet up at the CSMI building at 3 p.m. for our daily staff meeting. We should have received a report from the forensics team by then, so we'll take it from there. The team split up and James headed straight back to his office. He would need to take a nap if he was to make it through the day. James turned down the blinds and locked the door. He was to brief that bitch at 11 a.m., lead the team meeting at 3 p.m., and hold a press conference at 5 p.m. I hope no one calls me before my nap is over, he thought before he closed his eyes and fell asleep to a light sleep full of vivid, warm dreams. 3.4. John Dean faces troubling circumstances. John Dean's task for the day was to contact Mossman Scrooge Security, MSS, the security company responsible for the safety of the Di Maestro's mansion. He called the company and reached the voicemail referring him to an emergency number. He called that number and was referred to a third number and was told that helping police investigations was not an emergency according to MSS's standards. John looked at his watch. It showed 7 a.m. and the office of MSS would probably open at 10 a.m. John was contemplating his options. He could either call around for hours, picking arguments with an endless list of reference numbers, or he could go home, have breakfast with his family, take a short nap, and then visit the MSS office during office hours and get the help he needed. John chose the easy and diplomatic wait for business hours approach, aware that the delay risked letting the suspect out of the country. Well, in that case, at least there won't be any more shootout at the airport, he said to himself as a reassurance. At 10 a.m., John Dean walked in at the office and met with the public affairs manager of MSS, Richard Monroe. Richard Monroe turned out to be very helpful, and the following conversation took place. John Dean said, I'm here because of the murder at the Di Maestro's mansion. Richard Monroe said, Yes, I have heard about it, as it was our team that reported the crime to the police. It is a great tragedy to one of our best customers. John Dean said, Well, I understand. How come your security guards appeared at the scene so quickly? Did the killer set off an alarm? Richard Monroe said, We are unsure about this. Because an alarm went off, and when the alarm goes off, this causes all the concealed and visible security cameras to send a live feed to our command central. This feed is also recorded. But when the feed went on, Miranda Di Maestro was already murdered, and the perpetrator is not seen. John Dean said, Interesting. Any theories on how this happened? Richard said, Well, either the cameras were broken or the killer knew what he was doing. It would seem he remotely deactivated all our security, killed Mrs. De Maestro, and then left unnoticed. John Dean said, I see. How could this be done exactly? Richard Monroe said, well, no system is stronger than its weakest link. Since the security systems were ordered to be controlled remotely, it could be done by guessing the right password. Many people are not very good at picking good passwords. John Dean said, I see. So why was the alarm activated then? Richard Monroe said, we are investigating this now. It was either activated by the same person who deactivated the system or by a glitch in the system. We'll have to make an internal investigation and get back to you this afternoon. John Dean said, please do. Here is my card. Anything else to add? Richard said, yes, there was an incident earlier that evening with a drunken man threatening the victim, Miranda De Maestro, via the intercom. So she felt compelled to call security. This event activated the camera feed for 10 minutes until our men turned the feed off. Please take this USB stick with that video. John Dean said, thank you. You have been very helpful. Please call me later today when your analysis is complete. Richard Monroe said, will do, sir. Good luck with the investigation. After this conversation, John went back to his car to watch the video from the earlier incident at the De Maestro mansion the night before. He could see a drunken man on the street cursing and kicking an empty plastic bottle. John immediately recognized that man. Oh my God, it's Michael Fuller, he said to himself, falling back into his chair, struggling to decide what to do. 3.5. Thomas Anderson finds some contradictory evidence. Meanwhile, Thomas Anderson was searching the house for any data that might hint the team in the right direction. He did find a few pieces of very counterintuitive evidence. Apparently, Antonio De Maestro had sent a series of threatening emails to Miranda De Maestro over the last few months, and from this correspondence, it was clear that their relationship was stormy. But in the latest text messages found in Miranda De Maestro's phone, the tone was different. Apparently, Miranda had prepared a romantic night for Antonio when she was interrupted by her murderer. Since Thomas was not an expert on stormy relationships or any relationships for that matter, he decided to take this contradictory evidence to the perpetrator profiling support function of the CSMI. What he also put on his to-do list was to check the technical integrity of the inbox and the cell phone to check if these messages were sent when the timestamps indicated. While investigating the house, Thomas also found some of the concealed security cameras in the building. Unfortunately, all the wirings led to a locked room, and Thomas did not feel like tampering with the crime scene by picking a lock without discussing the matter with the rest of his team. Thomas kept looking for clues, but was unable to find any. A bit later in the day, the Stolen Property Department had done their review of the items in the building and concluded that 4 of the paintings were on their list of stolen artworks. Thomas Anderson decided to call James Locker. James Locker, while half asleep, said, "Hi Thomas, what are your findings?" Thomas Anderson said, "Seriously, mate, were you sleeping?" James Locker said, "Of course not. What are your findings?" Thomas Anderson said, "Well, several. Apparently, Antonio sent a lot of threatening email messages to Miranda, and yet it seems like he was the one she was meant to meet with that night. What would you make of that?" James Locker said, "Well, that does not necessarily mean more than that they were fighting and they tried to reconcile. What else?" Thomas Anderson said, "Apparently, the place is full of concealed security cameras. They are all wired to the same locked room. I decided to not pick the lock until after we have discussed it at the team meeting. Oh, and the stolen property team was here. They found out that 4 of the paintings were registered as stolen. James Locker said, "This discovery is significant. Possessing a high-value stolen art is enough to send an international arrestation order through Interpol. Finding this Antonio de Maestro guy must be our top priority. I will handle it with Barry." Thomas Anderson said, "Excellent. And one more thing, can you request a trace for Antonio's phone last night?" James Locker said, "Of course. Leave it to me and the beach. See you at 3 p.m. 3.6. The 21st of August, 3 p.m. staff meeting. At 3 p.m. the same day, the team gathered to summarize their findings and decide how to move on. Everyone except Barry was gathered in the same depressing room that James Locker had held his inauguration speech in the day before. James started the proceedings. He said, "Well, let's summarize the case this far. We have a murdered woman by the name of Miranda de Maestro. We have her shady husband, Antonio de Maestro, who was supposed to meet up with her last night. What we know is that they did not meet up for a romantic meeting. Furthermore, the killer entered the mansion and bypassed the advanced security system unnoticed. Email correspondences state that Miranda and Antonio have been fighting lately. Antonio's phone was in the neighborhood at the time of the crime. We have found 4 pieces of high-value stolen art in the mansion. The case is clear. Antonio must be our man." Samantha Robinson said, "Yes, the evidence points in that direction, but there are several issues in this case that don't feel right to me." James Locker said, "I see. Can you please share your thoughts with the group on this matter?" Samantha said, "Well, my issues with the case are this. The murderer's choice of weapon and killing method. This murder was a calculated murder done by a professional and not a crime of passion. If Antonio did kill his wife due to calculated reasons, why would he text her and ask her to set up a romantic evening? The smartest thing to do would be to get an alibi and let a hitman do it while he was far away. If he chose to kill her and has the mental presence to deactivate the building's security before doing so, why on earth would he have his phone turned on? If he was unaware that cell phones act as a 24-hour tracking device, why did he shut down the phone shortly after leaving the scene? As for my findings, well, I was talking to the neighbors accompanied by Assistant Johnson and Baker. We found out that nobody heard any gunshots. Considering Miranda was shot 6 times, this indicates the use of a silenced weapon. One neighbor mentioned a drunken man standing outside the house swearing and muttering for at least 10 minutes before finally leaving. This neighbor called Mossman Scrooge Security to have the nuisance removed from the neighborhood. They had already received a call on this matter from Miranda and were on their way. James Locker said, "Okay, communicating with MSS is John's responsibility, so don't worry about that. As for your objections to Antonio de Maestro being the killer, what is your theory?" Samantha Robinson said that someone with vast resources is trying to set him up. Perhaps a rival who has been unable to get to him. James Locker said, "And the stolen art?" Samantha Robinson said, "Well, those pieces seem to have been there for a long time. Antonio is probably guilty of this." James Locker said, "Interesting. Well, I guess you should talk to the organized crime department, as they might know if Antonio had any enemies. Oh, and can you contact Miranda's relatives and friends back in Colombia? Your file says you're the best Spanish speaker in the team. Samantha said, Well, I'm not fluent in any way, but I'll give it a shot. James Locker said, Moving on. Thomas, you have already reported your findings to me. What's new? Thomas Anderson said, Nothing. I was unable to pick the lock to the locked room in the mansion. Some of the guys from the forensics team also tried and failed. Whatever is hidden in there, it must be worth a lot. We'll get back there in due time and blow the lock off with explosives. But we can't do that until we have swept the house for evidence. We'll probably do it tomorrow afternoon or Friday morning. James Locker said, Well, we certainly don't want to ruin the evidence and have Antonio acquitted from a technicality. Proceed when you are finished with the forensics. Moving on to Adam. How is the search for Antonio going? Adam Smith said, Pretty bad. At first, the organized crime department refused to help me because I didn't have clearance to access their investigations. So I asked Barry for permission, but he was stalling it and questioned why I even needed the files. Instead, I visited the reception of Antonio's import-export business. They told me he was still abroad. Apparently, Antonio is still avoiding us since the Lopez's investigation. James Locker said, The Lopez's investigation? Adam Smith said, Oh yeah, you were not part of that case, as you were homesick. The last case we had before our Asia trip, a professional killer killing a guy in the warehouse owned by Antonio Di Maestro's company. Unfortunately for our killer, the place had a video surveillance. Even more unfortunate for him, he was unable to dodge bullets when he was in a gunfight with the airport police. He got shot several times and died on the way to the hospital. With the suspected killer dead, we transferred the case to the organized crime department. James Locker said, I see. Antonio only gets more and more interesting. So you have not been able to find out about his whereabouts then? Adam Smith said, That's correct. Even after I got clearance from Barry to access the Di Maestro's file, I got nowhere. The last observation the organized crime department have of him is more than 5 weeks old. James Locker said, I see. Well, since both you and Samantha have businesses with the OC department, let's go there together. 2 brains are better than 1. Oh well, we have been saving the best for last. John, what's your finding? John Dean had been sitting all the way through the meeting, fearing for when it was his turn to speak. He could not decide on how to act with information and evidence that Michael Fuller was outside Di Maestro's mansion, drunk and threatening Miranda via the intercom that night. If John destroyed the evidence, he could be charged with evidence tampering, which at the least would lead to immediate dismissal, but at worst could lead him to jail. But if he told the others about Michael's behavior and it turned out that Michael was innocent, he could lead the investigation in the wrong direction. He decided to confront Michael before sharing his knowledge with the team. John Dean said, Well, I spoke with Richard Monroe, the manager for public affairs at Mosman Scrooge Security. He was a helpful fellow, but the facts he provided us with make this investigation more complicated. James Locker said, Well, complexity is part of the job. The reality is never easy, but it's our job to put complicated facts together into a smooth case. John Dean said, Okay, here is the deal. The killer knew how to deactivate the security systems remotely, so there is no trace of him on the surveillance tapes, James Locker said. It would be natural for Antonio Di Maestro to disable the security cameras if he indeed is the killer. He must have the access codes to the remote access of his house's security, John Dean said. I'm sure he does, but here is the strange thing. Straight after the killer left the house, he remotely activated the alarm. The security company could see the corpse of Miranda on their screens, but no trace of the murderer. It seems like he wanted the body to be found as quickly as possible. James Locker said, Strange indeed. What about the drunken man who threatened Miranda over the intercom? Any trace of him? John Dean said, Well, MSS activated the feed to all the cameras and thus their recording functions straight after Miranda's call. I'm looking through all the feeds, but I have not had any vision of the threatening man yet. James Locker said, Keep looking. His identity is necessary to verify. James Locker said, That's it for now. Unless anyone has any objections, I release a press statement in an hour giving some minor details to the media and stating that our primary suspect is Antonio Di Maestro, but that we are also looking at other solutions to the case. Does anyone have any objections to this plan? The procedure seemed reasonable to the group, and no one had any objections. They agreed to conduct daily meetings at the same time every day, and the meeting was over. 3.7. Michael Fuller and John Dean form an alliance. Michael Fuller had spent the whole day drinking and listening to music. Because of this, he was blissfully unaware of Miranda Di Maestro's death. Michael was very drunk when John Dean called to remind him about their planned meeting. Damned, why he sounded upset, Michael thought for himself before checking his watch. It was 4 p.m. and John had requested a meeting at the local pub near John's house at 7 p.m. Michael realized that he would be better off sleeping for a while and have a shower before meeting with John Dean, as it would be hard to convince someone to help him while he was stinking of alcohol and his eyes were blood red. He set his alarm for 6 p.m. and went to bed for a nap. Before he fell asleep, he was considering the option just to walk away and let things be. Financially, it would not be a big deal. He had lots of money from working in a high position, as well as all the annual leaves he had saved up that would get paid out now that he had quit his job. Furthermore, his house was worth a lot since he had inherited it from his parents, who in turn had bought it long before the property bubble had hit Sydney. If he sold his house, he could live a comfortable life somewhere else and still leave an inheritance to his daughter. Oh yes, his daughter. If he stepped down now, he would finally have the time to repair that relationship with her. But then Michael got his resolve back. He had been wrongfully accused and had lost what he loved the most in the world. He would find the person behind this bullshit and have him hanged. Satisfied with his resolve, he fell into a few hours of slumber. Meanwhile, John Dean sat in his office and felt very stressed. Officially, he was working on reviewing old surveillance tapes to see if he could identify anything leading to the identity of the unknown drunken man who had threatened Miranda Di Maestro. Knowing that this man was his former boss and friend, Michael put him in a terrible mood. He would have to deliver the videos with commentary at the staff meeting the day after. But If he was sure about Michael's innocence, he could tamper with the videos a little bit, so they became blurry, too blurry for precise identification. Doing this was a safe procedure, but it would only buy him time, since blurry videos could be sent to a subcontractor who was an expert in getting a clear picture. However, since the others seemed pretty fixated on Antonio de Maestro, they might overlook the option to have the picture made clear, he thought, and decided to go with that option. In his family life, he also suffered from a lot of stress. His daughter had epilepsy and had seizures regularly. Either he or his wife had to stay home with her during these periods, which cost them money and career opportunities. His wife had stayed home with his daughter during most of the seizures, as John had assured her that he was in the front line of getting a promotion to a detective's rank, and thus get a sizable, well-needed pay rise. Now that he so clearly had been sidestepped and not even asked to be the provisional detective, it became apparent for the dean's spouses that his career opportunities were dull, and his wife was upset over having forsaken her career for his failed ambitions. John Dean finally made up his mind. He had decided to embark on a course of action which was not in line with his ambitions or morals, but his struggling finances and the disappointment over being sidestepped had dulled his senses. John decided that if Michael Fuller wanted help from him, he would have to pay for it. He copied all the data he had available on Antonio de Maestro to a USB memory stick. There was a lot of data at this stage, since the Central Sydney Organised Crime Department, CSOC, had opened their files on Antonio de Maestro for the CSMI during the ongoing murder investigation. John copied all the data on the Miranda de Maestro's murder, as well as the video of Michael Fuller outside the de Maestro's mansion that same night. They met at the sports bar near John's house, and John started the conversation. He said, "You look shit, mate. How much have you been drinking the last few days?" Michael Fuller said, "I have had a few bottles of whiskey." "You don't look that well either." John Dean said, "That's correct. I was called up at 2:30 this morning by Mosman local police due to a murder. And what is worse is that you are somehow involved." Michael Fuller said, "Me? How on earth would I be involved?" John Dean said, "Well, you called on the murder's victim's intercom and threatened her. A few hours later, she was found dead, shot with 6 bullets. Michael Fuller said, "What are you talking about?" "I was looking for Antonio de Maestro. Some woman at his house responded via the intercom. She was speaking poor English, so I got annoyed. But I did not threaten her." "Someone murdered her?" John Dean said, "Well, I had a drink at the local pub watching a game. Was it 12:30? It feels like I left at 11 p.m. John Dean said, "Well, your phone connected to the base station that connects to the de Maestro mansion until 12:30. The estimated time of the Miranda de Maestro's murder was 12:15. You better give me a reasonable explanation on why you contacted the de Maestro's mansion in the first place." Michael Fuller said, "Okay, wait a sec. I just need to go to the bathroom." Michael Fuller went to the bathroom. He was sweating heavily, and panic spread like a plague across his body. He had been drinking heavily for almost 48 hours straight, with little or no sleep. His vision was fading, and Michael saw the shadows around him moving. He could hear the dark voices around him speaking in a foreign, demonic tongue. This is why I need my job back, to keep me from drinking too much and giving my life a purpose, he thought. Without a purpose, his life was void and black. He had been alone for so long, so he forgot how it felt to feel something for another human being. Although Michael loved his daughter, it had been so long since they hung out and did something meaningful, so he had forgotten how that love felt. Michael could feel how the shadows tried to claim his soul, but he would not let them. He would fight back. He stuck his fingers down his throat and vomited into the toilet. Afterwards, he took a gulp of mouthwash, which he had in a miniature bottle in his pocket. Michael threw it away after use. He had decided that he would not need it again. He went back to John, who was sipping on a beer to pass the time. Michael Fuller said, "Sorry about that. Could you please put that beer away?" John was looking at Michael for a second and realized that this was not his battle to fight, so he complied and left the almost full schooner of beer at the bar. Michael Fuller said, "Thank you. I just realized that I needed to get my alcohol problems in check. To understand my reason for going to the Maestro's mansion, you need to know the actual reason for my resignation. I did not resign because of liver problems, but because I was set up. Barry got tipped off that I was storing large quantities of cocaine at my house, cocaine that I supposedly stole from the crime scene of Lopez's murder. Antonio de Maestro owns the warehouse where Lopez was killed, and I have been making inquiries about him on my spare time, as I'm not satisfied with the case being handed over to the OC after the alleged killer, Angelo Ramirez, was killed at the airport. Apparently, I asked too many questions and was causing trouble as someone found it a good idea to waste a lot of cocaine to set me up. Barry then got tipped off by someone and sent 2 guys he knows from some shady security company. They found the cocaine, 3.5 kilos to be exact, in my house with my fingerprints on it. And they gave me 2 options: either signing my resignation or facing charges in court. I decided to sign my resignation. Barry then handed me the cocaine and told me to destroy it in his private bathroom, which I did. John Dean said, "Fascinating story, Michael, but sadly alcohol-induced paranoia. Barry would not let you get away with this unless he was involved in a conspiracy against you. If Barry were involved in a plot against you, he would not let you destroy 3.5 kilos of cocaine. If Barry was an honest cop, he would have forwarded this case to the internal investigations, and you would be facing a long-term jail penalty." Michael Fuller said, "Well, Barry is a very particular person. For him, appearance is everything. And the image of CSMI is his baby, and he loves it more than anything. Barry does not care for justice or truth, as long as everything looks good. That's why he chose to cover it up. You do realize how embarrassing it would be for the department if its leading and the most famous detective, me, was charged with the serious drug charges?" John Dean said, "Well, you might be right. Barry is a fucking retard. I'm not convinced, but I might help you for old friendship's sake on one condition." Michael Fuller said, "I'm listening." John Dean said, "I am broke. My marriage is crumbling, and my daughter's condition is worsening. I need money, Michael, and I know you're rich." Michael turned red of anger and disappointment. He did not feel like his short stint as a sober alcoholic had turned out for the better. Michael felt desperate for a drink. He could see the bottles in the bar and they were calling for him. He regained his composure and replied. Michael said, "John, this is outrageous. I thought you were my friend during all these years, and now you do not believe in me. Instead, you are offering me help in return for money? You have fallen from the man I used to know." John Dean said, "Well, I guess we both have, but your word changes nothing. I still need money, $10,000 to be specific, that will keep me afloat for a while. Don't see it as a bribe, see it as helping a friend in need. If things improve, I promise to pay you back." Michael said, "And if I don't pay?" John Dean said, "Then this meeting never took place. I won't turn you in, but I won't help you either." Michael Fuller was contemplating his options. The evidence against him in the Miranda de Maestros case was not enough for conviction, but God knows what other proof could be fabricated if there was a conspiracy against him within the CSMI. Could John Dean be the one behind it all? Well, that seemed unlikely because if John were in it for the money, he would make a lot more from selling the stolen cocaine than from blackmailing Michael. Money was not an issue for Michael as he owned a large beach house near Palm Beach. The house was overdimensioned for his needs and he rarely went to the beach anyway. As $10,000 was not a lot for Michael, he decided to accept John's offer. Michael Fuller said, "Okay, I accept your offer. Shall I transfer the money right now?" John Dean said, "No, that would be traceable. I'll come by your house tomorrow afternoon with the files. Make sure to have the money ready in cash." They agreed to meet up at 5 p.m. the following day, and they separated for the evening. John Dean was filled with worries while traveling home. For sure his economy was saved for at least 6 months if he got the money. He could finally get back on track with his mortgage. But how would he explain this sudden influx of money to his wife? And what if he got caught? Most of all, he was worried about his human development and his downward spiral down into the darkness he had spent all his life trying to fight in society. He had seen a lot of police officers join the force for all the wrong reasons. Some had enlisted for the lust of violence, and they regularly used excessive force when making arrests. Some had joined for the desire for power and authority, and they routinely harassed and threatened people for the rush of it. Finally, some officers had joined to get a badge to scheme the other criminals for money. He suspected that both Thomas Anderson and Adam Smith were in the latter category and used their badges to get free drugs and hookers. John Dean reckoned that they probably only did drugs when they had a few days off work, as there were random drug tests in place among police officers. But his opinion about them was clear. They just reeked of corruption. Now, he could place himself in the same category as Thomas Anderson and Adam Smith, or even worse. Because something was very wrong with Michael's behavior this evening, and if he were left unchecked, he would do a lot of worse things than stealing drugs. 3.8. Adam Smith and James Locker playing video games at Adam's place. It was Thursday evening and James Locker and Adam Smith were meeting up at Adam's place to play the yearly installment of the Aussie Rules football game. From a gameplay perspective, the game was utter rubbish, but as both Adam and James were hardcore AFL fans, though they still saw the game as an excellent opportunity to experience those massive victories over their rival that never experienced when they played Aussie Rules football in reality. Since Adam was the better video games player of the two, he beat James every game, which brought him great joy, but also a bit of frustration. Adam Smith said, "Hey mate, you better start focusing. It takes half the pleasure of beating you up when you're not even trying." James Locker said, "Oh, sorry man, I'm a bit off my game today. I guess I'm overthinking things." Adam Smith said, "I see. Awesome thoughts, lame thoughts, or plain strange ideas?" James Locker said, "Well, I was considering changing my name to get a new start in life." Adam Smith said, "But why on earth would you want a new start? You just landed a promotion, you fucked half of Asia during your holiday, and despite being over 30, you are neither fat nor ugly. You lead a remarkable life, I reckon. Learn from me and be awesome as well." James Locker said, "So, you are happy with life then?" Adam Smith said, "Yes, of course. I get fed, paid, and laid. What is there to whine about?" James Locker said, "Well, you might want to get loved and appreciated for who you are." Adam Smith said, "Look, if I wanted to listen to emotional whining when playing video games, I would get a girlfriend and play with her. Here are 2 shots of absinthe, bottoms up and harden up, James." After sculling the shots, James realized that Adam was not the right person to share his complex inner thoughts with, which was good, as Adam undoubtedly had a point. Sometimes it was better just to keep things simple. Fueled by this insight, James focused and spent the evening trying to beat Adam in that damn video game. 3.9 Friday afternoon, and Antonio De Maestro still at large. The last staff meeting of the week took place on the Friday afternoon. A few new pieces of evidence came up, but James Locker reckoned that none of the new evidence was of such value that it was motivated for the team to work overtime during the weekend. The report from the forensics team stated that they had found DNA from 4 different people in the mansion, 2 males and 2 females. The 2 women DNA were identified as the housekeepers Kim Ji-woo, who worked in the estate 3 times a week, and the late Miranda De Maestro herself. The housekeeper had a sound alibi for the evening and no apparent motive for killing her employer, so James decided that she shouldn't be kept under surveillance. The 2 male DNA was a more significant issue. One of them was from Antonio De Maestro, which was natural, as he supposedly lived in the house. The second male DNA was more important to follow up upon. It could be from the killer if Antonio was not the killer, or it could be from whoever visited the house in the last few days. Fortunately, they had managed to get access to the security room of the building with the mainframe. In the security room, the investigators found a large amount of money as well as minor amounts of cocaine, clearly indicating what kind of business Antonio De Maestro was doing. As expected, all the feeds showcasing the actual murder had been remotely deactivated. But apart from that, there were security feeds for a long time back. The group decided that these feeds were important and the work to go through them was assigned to Samantha Robinson and Thomas Anderson, a task they both seemed happy to receive. Considering the DNA from the unknown man, Adam Smith and John Dean were assigned to find the alternative killers. The main priority was to identify the man who called on the intercom and threatened Miranda De Maestro, but they were also to make inquiries among Antonio De Maestro's business contacts to find out if he had any enemies who wanted to set him up. 3.10 Friday night equals laser tag night. Since the work week was over, Thomas Anderson and Adam Smith decided to spend their Friday night playing laser tag. They did this now and then, and tonight's session was of great importance to get their skills up for the Sydney Laser Tag Championship, held the following week. Accompanying them this week was Samantha Robinson, who Thomas Anderson had persuaded to join their team for the upcoming championship. Since they did not want any team members who sucked, they decided to give her the necessary training before the games that mattered. After 3 games, they decided to take a break, and they had the following conversation. Adam Smith said, 3 games, 3 first places, I am indeed still the king of laser tag. Samantha Robinson said, Oh, Adam, you are so sexy. I'm getting all wet. Adam Smith said, Oh, really? Samantha Robinson said, Yeah, not from you, but from sweat. Running around with a toy gun is more fun than I imagined. Next week will be awesome. Adam Smith said, Yeah, you're better than I thought. I feared we would be stuck with a feeder just because Thomas wanted to make a move on you, but you might get better than him. Thomas Anderson said, I did not bring her as a lame pickup attempt. I brought her here because we need 4 players for the championship next week, so that it will be you and I, Samantha and James. Adam Smith said, James? He sucks. Worst player I have ever seen. Thomas Anderson said, Well, that's because of his color blindness. James can only play well when he knows the people he is playing with. He does not function at all in a mixed team. Adam Smith said, We'll see about that. I got to go. I'm getting late tonight. Adam Smith smiled with a huge smile. Thomas Anderson said, No, you're not. You're just making up an excuse so you can leave with 3 consecutive wins. I'm not buying that one. We'll keep playing. My stamina is better than yours. Adam Smith said, Oh, really? Look at this text. Adam Smith handed over the phone to Thomas to show an SMS conversation he had with a woman. The entire dialogue consisted of different smileys, question marks, and exclamation marks. Not many words were written. The last message from the woman was a question mark, followed by Adam's response, an exclamation mark. Thomas Anderson said, What the fuck is this? It looks completely retarded. How does this mean you are getting laid tonight? Adam Smith said, Well, mate, she is a psychologist, so she listens to people whine about their feelings and stuff all day long. So when the urge comes, all she wants is sex, and I am happy to provide. Thomas Anderson said, That is beyond retarded. Samantha Robinson interrupted Thomas Anderson. She said, Oh God, Thomas, why do you even care if this woman exists or not? But yeah, you can't leave yet, Adam. We'll have to play a final game to determine the winner of tonight. And I'm going to show you some girl power if you're up for it. Adam Smith said, Tough words, indeed. I accept your challenge. They went in to play a final round before Adam Smith had to leave to meet his booty call. To Adam's surprise, he got beaten up by Samantha. Thomas Anderson finished second with a small margin, and Adam Smith got by his standards a humiliating 3rd place. Thomas Anderson said, Ha ha, psych out. The great master of a laser tag beaten big time by a girl. How does it feel? Adam, who had a very red face from the physical exertion, yelled, "Oh, shut up. You suck 9 out of 10 games, and besides, she beat you up too." Adam cooled down for a while and then he added, "Anyway, I'm leaving now. I'm getting late tonight. Good luck with that." After this outburst that caused everyone to look at him, Adam quickly left the venue. Thomas and Samantha decided to have another drink and went to a couch to have a chat. After a while, she leaned her head towards him and said, "You know he was right about one thing. You do suck at laser tag." Thomas looked at her with sad eyes and said nothing. Samantha Robinson said, "But he was also wrong about one thing." Thomas Anderson said, "Okay, and what would that be?" Samantha Robinson smiled at him and said, "Well, you are getting laid tonight." She pulled the surprised Thomas Anderson towards her and they kissed passionately.